Hello, this is Dr. Lenicky, working on the podcast for week 4. This week we're talking about beneficence and justice. All right, our objectives this week independently identify the continuum of beneficence and its impact on healthcare, completely differentiate between medical and total good, and how good impacts the patient experience, and fully value the principles of justice in debating an ethical dilemma related to fairness. Right, which code of ethics best fits this lecture? It would be Principle 2. Physical therapists shall adhere to the core values of the profession and shall act in the best interests of patients and clients over the interests of the physical therapists. All right, what is beneficence? Beneficence is helping others, which is the cornerstone of professional health care. As I sat through interviews for the last several years of students applying to PT school, that became the theme. Why do you want to be a PT? Because I want to help others. And we hear that a lot. And it may sound like a canned or a very simple response, but I think it is the cornerstone of our profession. So beneficence can be specific or general. Specific is considered when you are helping family or friends. General is when it is performed by strangers. I'm going to read to you from page 20 in the book, a story. And so sorry I'm reading again like it's first grade, but this is an interesting and very sad story. So shortly after 3 a.m., Kitty Genovese parked her car in a space near her apartment. She worked as a manager in a bar, so she had learned to be careful arriving home late at night. As she walked towards her apartment, she saw something that alerted her, and she headed towards a police call box. Before she could reach it, she was attacked by a man and stabbed. She yelled out, "Oh my God, he stabbed me. Please help me." A resident in the apartment threw open his window and yelled out, "Let that girl alone." Lights in the apartment complex came on, and the assailant fled. Kitty struggled to get to her apartment, only to be ambushed by her attacker a second time. He initiated rape and then stabbed her again, and she yelled out, "I'm dying, I'm dying." The lights came on again as people came to their windows. Again, the man was frightened off. Kitty made it back to the building where the entrances to the apartment were located. She was weak and stopped in the second doorway. The attacker returned for a third time and stabbed her to death. In the 35 minutes that lapsed from her first screams to her death, 38 neighbors were aware of her struggle, and not one called the police until after the final attack. When the police were finally called, it was by a man, one of the 38, who said he deliberately called a friend in another country for advice. Then he crossed the roof of the building to the apartment of an elderly woman to get her to make the call. He explained that he went to all this trouble because, quote, "I didn't want to get involved," end quote. Later studies of this and related cases reveal that most people failed to call for help because they assumed someone else would. Isn't this ridiculously sad? This woman's life may have been saved had someone just made a call. Not all cases are that dramatic. If you think the difference between specific and general beneficence, if you're driving down the road and you see a friend stopped on the side of the road having car problems, you're going to stop. That's your friend. You're going to help them. But how many times have you passed cars on the side of the road and you didn't stop? Not your problem, right? Somebody else can help them. You don't know what's going on. You don't want to get involved. You would hope, though, that any of us who hears someone being attacked would actually call for help. All right. Good Samaritan laws are in place to help protect anyone who does provide aid. In North Carolina, any person who renders first aid or emergency assistance at the scene of a motor vehicle crash on any street or highway, or to any person injured as a result of an accident, shall not be liable for civil damages as long as the acts of the service rendered do so in a normal way without any intentional wrongdoing. So if you stop to help somebody and you're unable to save them, you are not going to be liable, even as a physical therapist, as long as what you did was in good faith and appropriate. Good Samaritan laws are there to protect those who stop and help. Now, in the case of that story, those individuals did not break the law. In most states, there is no law that says you must help someone who is in distress. Now, again, many of you may not remember the Seinfeld episodes, but the very last Seinfeld episode, they were on a plane, they had to land in some small town that had just set up a law that said if you don't help someone who's being harmed, you will be charged. And that was kind of the last episode, as they saw somebody being robbed and they stood there and videoed it and kind of laughed about it. Ended up getting arrested and going to jail. And so that's not the case in most states and most places. You're not breaking the law if you do nothing to help, and that is very unfortunate. Right, there is a continuum of beneficence. Okay, not everyone is what I would say Mother Teresa and tries their best to benefit everyone. But under obligation, so you always have the obligation of beneficence. Strict is to tell the truth, don't intentionally injure others, etc. Those are the things that we do because that's what we're supposed to. Where the weak obligation is, say, behaving in a civil manner, waiting your turn. So other people may not be injured, but they will live a better and happier life if you behave with weak obligation. To where supererogation, these are optional, and these are above and beyond the obligatory, to where they you become very morally good and praiseworthy. Again, Mother Teresa is who I would think of for supererogation. Within beneficence, patients expect personal concern from healthcare professionals. When a patient goes to tell a professional their story and to say, this is what's wrong with me, they expect that individual to care. So you need to have sympathy, empathy, and compassion towards patients. These are all forms of caring, and are ethical responses to a patient's situation. When you are thinking of beneficence for an individual, as a healthcare provider, you're typically wondering about their medical good. So you are measuring it in terms of health and their well-being based on the healthiness of that individual. Total good is overall unified well-being of the individual. So their health, happiness, ability to work, financial security. It may be relationships with friends and family. And often these two are similar to each other, and hopefully having medical good will lead to total good, but that's not always the case. So imagine if you right now messed your knee up, and the doctor says, ideally, we want to do surgery within a week. But if you have surgery this week, you may be out of school for 2 or 3 weeks, which may lead you to fail your classes and have to start back next year in school. And you don't want to do that. You would rather wait till the Christmas break to have your knee surgery. So there is where medical good, where the doctor says you need to have the surgery this week, and total good may not be the same thing because your interest may lie elsewhere. And this is going to be the case in a lot of medical situations. You need to understand the patient and what is important in their life and what creates happiness and good, and try to coincide that with the medical good for the patient. There are several factors to consider when you're thinking about beneficence towards a patient. And one is clinical competence. You have to know what you're doing to be able to benefit the patient best. So your expertise as a physical therapist is very important. But there's also professional distance, so not becoming inappropriately involved with clients. Some people become very emotional and very attached to their patients and only want what's best for them. But patients need to have the autonomy to make their own decisions. And so these emotional attachments that I'm talking about, it risks invading their privacy, it threatens the patient autonomy, and it can increase costs. You may do additional treatments that may not be in the best interest of the patient, both the best medical good and the best total good. So you need to remain impartial to patients, help them, educate them, continue to allow them to have their autonomy while benefiting the patient. All right, we're going to move on to the next concept, and this is justice. If you want to have any further clarification, most of this is in Chapter 11. And so what code of ethics fits justice? Physical therapists shall participate in efforts to meet the health needs of people locally, nationally, and globally. So what is justice? Just behavior or treatment. To me, this is fairness to others. And this can be a difficult principle because who determines fairness? Very similar to the different ethical theories that we talked about, where if somebody is thinking of utilitarianism, what the response would be different if it's religious ethics or if it is some different ethical theory. So Beauchamp and Childress developed principles related to ethics. Related to justice. And sometimes you have to determine which one of these principles are going to apply in that case. So justice can be to each person an equal share, to each person according to their need, according to their effort, to their contribution, to their merit, or according to free market exchange. On page 150, there's an example of fairness to staff. And I'm not going to read it all, but the example is that a PT staff does not have the money, or a physical therapy department doesn't have the money to send all their faculty to continuing education courses. So they decide one night a week they would host short continuing education courses for the community and raise money to be able to send those in the department to outside courses. Well, there's disagreement on how the money should be spent. So one therapist says, I teach spinal manipulation. I'm going to have a lot of people in my class. I should get more money. Another therapist who treats in a setting that isn't needed as much but may be just as important, such as pediatric burns, may teach a course and there's not as many people attending a class on treating pediatric burns. And there's some that feel that the money raised should go equally to all in the department. So that first principle, to each person an equal share. Others feel that whoever made the contribution should be the ones who get the money. And so you need to determine what principle of justice you're going to apply in this situation. And there's several ways to view justice in healthcare, through micro-allocation or macro-allocation. Micro-allocation deals with issues concerning justice and distributing resources to individuals within a healthcare organization. Sometimes I would think of this as there's a snowstorm and only 2 therapists can show up. You usually have 5 or 6 therapists. Many of the patients are starting to show up. You have to deal with which of those patients and how that clinic that day is going to allocate their resources to be able to treat those. Are you going to treat those with the highest need, who's driven the furthest, who recently had surgery? What's going to be your micro allocation? It is something on a smaller scale and may affect people more on a temporary basis. Not always. It can be a more long term, but think of those day-to-day decisions you have to make to allocate your resources. Or macro allocation, this is public policy issues and how to allot resources within the society. And this can be within the federal level, the state level, a local level. And this can, I think of examples of with Medicare. How do you prioritize which services can be paid for? Also prioritizing healthcare services and other societal goods based on how many goods are available in society. And within justice, there's ethical theories that can come to play. So rights-based justice is obligation to provide for others in respect to their rights. Do they have the right to that service? Legal-based justice is honoring what's the medically acceptable laws. This would be the easy example is when someone shows up in an emergency room and has a life-threatening type injury. It is the law that says the emergency room must provide care regardless of the individual's ability to pay. And then there's distributive justice, which when there's scarce resources, you have the responsibility to provide care to those who need it the most. So along that theme, in theories of justice, you also have utilitarianism, which is the maximum benefit for the most number of individuals. So is it just to, or you would consider that justice if what you did benefited the most amount of people? It focuses on the outcome and what benefits the most across the population. There's also a capability approach, which focuses on health as central to our well-being. So in summary, beneficence is the cornerstone to healthcare, and justice theories have morphed over time, and depending on which theory of justice you follow may lead to a different outcome in each situation.